Today's topic is it safe to eat gluten?
Welcome to the Restorative Longevity Podcast, where we share how to increase your quality of life while also increasing your longevity. Now let's welcome our host, Jimmy Yen, also known as the AccuSensei. Jimmy is a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, nutritionist, and restorative longevity expert dedicated to guiding you on your journey to vibrant health and lasting wellness.
So the short answer is yes and no. And I'm going to go into details as to because why is it safe? Why is it safe to eat gluten? Most people, hear that gluten is terrible for you. You should stay away from gluten. And that this is what especially in the US with the holistic practitioners, everybody will say, hey, stop gluten. And if you have thyroid problems, everybody's telling you, oh, you should not be eating gluten. You should not be staying away from wheat, bread, and all this stuff. It triggers, your autoimmune, your Hashimoto's, your Graves', your rheumatoid, just any type of autoimmune condition, right? If that were the case, let's just think about this logically. If gluten is really the cause trigger of all these autoimmune, what if a lot of people are watching different podcasts, reading different articles, and it's saying stay away from gluten? So all these autoimmune people are staying away from gluten. But are the autoimmune conditions getting better or worse, especially in the US? They're getting worse, right? So just staying away from gluten doesn't really solve anything. Again, it's a symptom band-aid approach, but that's not today's topic. Today's topic is it safe to eat gluten? And that's what we're going to go over today. Is it safe to eat gluten? So to understand, we need to understand what gluten is in order to, determine what is it safe or is it not? Gluten is a protein. For those of y'all who don't know, gluten is a protein, and it's contained in a variety of grains, mostly known in wheat. That's what everybody usually refers to, wheat. But it's also contained in rye and barley. Barley is maya in Chinese medicine, and it's used for digestive, right? Here's something I would say it's opposite of what mainstream is saying about gluten. So gluten is in barley. Barley is a Chinese herb, and it's an herb. It's called maya. And I'll tell you what the purpose or the use of barley, the function of barley. But, in the US, gluten is the evil, protein that disrupts your digestive system. It makes your digestive system worse, right? And here's the interesting part. So that's why people, holistic practitioners, functional medicine practitioners will tell people, get away from gluten, stop all gluten, okay? Because it destroys your digestive system. Now, and it causes gut permeability. So in a previous podcast, I talked about gut permeability. It basically means your poop is going out of your intestines into your bloodstream, right? So that's what mainstream information is. Now, thousands of years ago, 3,000 years ago, gluten and, I would say barley contains gluten. Barley is an herb that was used to restore the digestive system. It's just like counter, these informations are the exact opposite. Information today about barley, gluten is stay away from it because it will cause digestive problems. 3,000 years ago, they used barley to treat digestive issues. So what's the deal, right? Why is there such, different information? We'll get into that later on in this podcast. But I just want to let you know, even among the holistic practitioners and holistic research and holistic information, it's you have to, it's just with any research, you have to see what you believe in, because there's going to be research to prove both. Okay. There's going to be research to prove both sides of the story. So I would recommend this. when we're having discussions about nutrition, never go into a discussion saying, oh, I read this research, so I am right. Because chances are the other person has their research proving that they are right. So both of you may have two opposing views with opposing research. Point is, nobody knows who's right or wrong. So it's really about what you believe and what you personally experience. That is your guiding star to what is right and wrong and what you should be doing in regards to how you eat. Okay. Now, the benefit that myself and my team at Achieve Integrative Health, the benefit that we have is not only do we have our own personal experience, we have also the experience of our patients. Because we in our clinic, even though we're an acupuncture and wellness clinic, we talk about diet with all of our patients. And so we have thousands of case studies. So that's why we rely upon our case studies. This information that I'm providing you is based on real people. It's not based on laboratory rats. It's not based on experiments done on rats and rodents. It's done on real people today, right? Some people may say, oh, but that 3,000-year-old, medicine, that's for 3,000-year-old. People today are different. Well, yes and no. And so that's why I say we use data that is today on people today, literally today, right? And so that's how I'm giving you this piece of information is from personal experience. All of our team members, we do it ourselves, just like you do. You experiment on yourself, the food that you eat. How does it affect you? Does it inflame your body? Does it help your body? And then we also have thousands of case studies that we are actively tracking, actively treating. Okay. So going back to gluten, gluten is a protein. Okay. Now there is very little research and data, even on rats, that shows gluten's effect on brain health. Most of the research done is on gut health. There's lots of research that say, hey, gluten affects the gut health, but there's very little research that affects the brain health. Okay. So your second brain. So gluten has been proven to affect one of your brains, but not much research has been done on your other brain up here, right? So how does it affect your first brain or your second brain, your gut health? It increases intestinal permeability. So again, it allows poop to escape from your intestines to go in your bloodstream. This is called leaky gut. Gut permeability, intestinal permeability is another word for saying leaky gut. Now, what is the result of a leaky gut? Is a weakened immune system and inflammation. Okay, so that's what gluten does. Now, scientists believe how your gut reacts to gluten depends on your DNA, both your human DNA and your microbial DNA. So remember, your bacteria in your intestines, they have a DNA of their own. So depending on your human DNA that you got from your parents and the DNA from the bacteria that is located in your intestines, that will dictate how you react to gluten. That's what some scientists say, right? And that tends to make sense to me. For now, I believe that. So that's about gluten. So here's the thing. Again, gluten has not been proven to have any effect, or nobody knows how it affects the brain, right? But in my previous podcast, I told you your gut, which is one of your second brain or your first brain, depending on how you see it, affects your brain up here. So if you do that logical correlation, if gluten affects your gut and your gut affects your brain, then obviously correlation, the gluten should affect your brain health, right? Now, there are naturally occurring gluten-free grains. Not all grains have contained gluten. So what are they? Amaranth, buckwheat, millet, rice, sorghum, and teff. And then there's other like tofu, quinoa is a seed, right? These all do not contain gluten. So if you want to eat grain, you want to eat breads that are made from amaranth, buckwheat, millet, rice, sorghum, teff, tofu, or quinoa. These are if you like to eat bread, you can eat bread from these specific gluten-free grains. They don't need to be made gluten-free. They come gluten-free naturally, okay? So you got to be careful about also gluten-free products. Because of the gluten-free trend, the food companies, they're alert. They want to make money, so they start to make gluten-free products. You got to be careful about gluten-free products. You want to eat gluten-free products that are naturally gluten-free. Like I just talked about the bread. You don't want to make gluten-free products that were made synthetically gluten-free, right? So they're chemical based. Those chemicals will kill you worse than the gluten itself. Okay, so just be careful of that. And here's one thing that I tell all of our patients at Achieve Integrative Health. It is impossible to eat healthy. It is impossible. It is almost virtually impossible to be gluten-free when you eat out, because gluten is in everything. Yes, there are restaurants that say they are gluten-free, but it's not just about the ingredients. It's about the utensils. What pan do they use, right? What plate, what sauces do they use? All of those are, I would say, opportunities for gluten to infiltrate your food. So unless a restaurant has completely separate silverware, cookware, sauces that are gluten-free, it's virtually impossible to go gluten-free to eat if you're going to eat out. Okay? And for restaurants to do that, that costs money. So if you go to a gluten-free restaurant and they're not more expensive than the normal restaurant, I'd be concerned, okay, if it was truly gluten-free. There's always cross-contamination. Okay, so gluten is in everything. That's a fact. Okay? So many of our anxieties, especially in the US, about diet, it takes a form of searching for the perfect nutrient, the ultimate superfood, the magic pill, the cure-all. And if you are looking for that, here's, hate to burst your bubble, that doesn't exist, right? And because it hasn't existed for 3,000 years. So when some type of company comes out and say, oh, this is the superfood, well, it was probably man-made. So it's not really food, okay? Now, so what we can see is no matter what we've learned, everything we learn, no matter what we seek, the answer ultimately lies in the nutrients existing in unadulterated versions of the food we eat. So if you're looking for the perfect, the magic pill, the magic nutrient, that's gonna save your life, and it's gonna allow you to not have to worry about getting whole foods and cooking at home, then anybody selling you that is a lie. They're selling you a lie. Because if you want to be healthy, and this has been proven since the man was created, and it will not change, you have to eat food, whole foods, from unadulterated sources. All right? So you grow them in the farm, instead of farm to market, farm to table, farm to mouth. Okay? All right. So how we eat and how we approach food really is really what matters. How we eat and how we approach food is really what matters in regards to improving your health, okay? So in order to change our diets, we need to begin by relearning the art of eating, which is cooking. You got to eat. How do you source the food? And you have to, how do you eat, right? Which is a question of lifestyle as much as it is nutrition. So today, with nutrition, everybody's so concerned about which foods have the most nutrition, which foods are gluten-free, which foods have the most fiber, which foods have the most vitamin A. That is important, but that's not as important as lifestyle. How you eat, what foods you are choosing to eat, and how you're eating them. That is more important than okay, I want to make sure I get enough vitamin K, enough vitamin A, C in my foods. That's secondary. Because if you have the right lifestyle, you will naturally get those nutrients. Okay? Now, food categories. So like I said, gluten is in everything, and it's hidden in a lot of things. So let me give you a list of foods, categories that you may not even know has gluten, and it's hidden in there. Okay. This is what I tell our patients. There's two, I would say, ingredients when you eat out that you can almost never avoid: gluten, sugar. These are the two things that you can almost never avoid. A third one may be dairy, but the most two are gluten and sugar. If you eat out, you can't avoid these. Okay. So here's some food categories that contain gluten that you may not even know. Okay. Some of you may know, some of you may make sense, some of you may not. Grain cereals, that's one. Pastas, like ravioli, dumplings, gnocchi, noodles, they have gluten in them. Baked goods, breakfast goods, like cereals, granola, pancakes, French toast, biscuits, sauces. Gluten is hidden in sauces, even soy sauce, right? Soy sauce, any type of sauces they use, gluten is probably in there. Gravies, processed meats have gluten. Meat should not have gluten. Like you go get some bacon. I'm not bacon. You get some pork, some beef. Those naturally do not have gluten, but processed meats have gluten. Okay. Condiments like salad dressings, marinades, mayonnaise, ketchup, they all have gluten in them. Read the label. Okay. Fried foods, candy bars, creamers, they have gluten in them. Soups, broths, beverages like beers, lagers, wine coolers, vodka, drugs, fillers. You take medication, most likely it has gluten in it. They're over-the-counter meds, dietary supplements, even some dietary supplements. So if you don't get, here's the thing about dietary supplements. The dietary supplements are on the rise. But here's what people, don't realize is that dietary supplements are not all the same. And if you don't look for a third-party tested dietary supplement, it probably has gluten in it. It has gluten hidden in it. Okay? Women, you're not going to like this. Lipstick, lip gloss, lip balm. These all can contain gluten. So you may be staying away from eating gluten, but then you put on your lipstick and you're licking you're licking your lips. You're licking gluten every day, right? So these are the things that you may not be aware of. Now, why do I say, the question is it safe to eat gluten? I said yes and no. Why did I say that in the very beginning? Because gluten is not the same everywhere in the world. Okay. Now, it's technically the same protein, right? But how it is processed, so gluten comes from like wheat, right? How it's processed is completely different in different parts of the world. And I've mentioned this in a previous podcast, but there's different types of wheat. Okay. So gluten comes, right, is contained in a variety of grains, and it's mostly, we know it from wheat. Now, different countries grow different wheat varieties. So there's one way how the US grows it, and then there's one way how Europe grows it. Completely different. US wheat often has higher gluten than European wheat, right? European wheat, and we're more specifically, I'm talking about Italy and France. European wheat often grows older, softer varieties like durum and spelt, which is lower in gluten and less processed. In the US, the reason why that we have all these gluten sensitivities is because US, they grow their wheat with a higher gluten content because they were used for baking fluffy bread. Okay. Now in Asia typically doesn't grow their wheat, they import it. Okay. But they use different grains, but as a substitute, if they're going to get wheat, they import it. I found out like in Taiwan, they import it from the US and Australia, but mostly from the US. So that's why Taiwan's going to eventually see a high increase in gluten sensitivities and gluten allergies because we're importing the wheat from the US. But the beauty about in Asia is we don't need to use wheat There's other grains like rice, millet, or buckwheat. Okay. And the typical traditional Asian diets are naturally gluten-free. So typical Asian diets are naturally gluten-free. It's when we, when U.S. companies brought KFC, McDonald's to to Taiwan, to Asia, that they started bringing the sad American diet, right? The standard American diet, sad diet, standard American diet. When businesses started bringing the sad diet to Asia, that's when the Asians health started to decline. And there was a book called the China Study that uh, if are saying, oh, the American diet is good. No, it's not. It's terrible. Um, they did a study over years to show how the standard American diet kills communities. Okay. But for some reason, the American government allows it to be a standard. Now, how it's processed. So the wheat in Europe versus US is processed differently. The wheat in the US supposedly, technically, is not genetically modified. See, this is how they get around they get around the non-GMO, right? But in my opinion, they're still genetically modified because they are hybridizing the wheats. They're choosing specific types, variations of wheats, and they're basically making babies, right? And they're making babies so that this new version of wheat in the US, it contains a high amount of gluten, and it's processed with additives to improve shelf life. So that means it can stay on your shelves longer. So that's how the US wheat is grown. Now, wheat in Europe, it's completely different. They have a stricter food law that limits additives, and they mandate clear labeling. Like the hybridizing in the US should be labeled genetically modified, but it's not. Okay. Now, I've had many friends that are gluten sensitive in the US, but then when they go to France and Italy, they can eat gluten. They can eat wheat. Why is that? Right? Because here's another thing. It's the processing. It's not always just the wheat and the gluten that disrupts your gut and your gut permeability. It's the way it's processed. Because people in the US, they may be reacting to preservatives, pesticides like glyphosate, or enzymes used in American bread making. So it's not just the gluten. Gluten is not the only culprit. It's the manufacturing process, right? So how it's prepared. Traditional sourdough in European countries use long fermentation. Remember, fermentation in a previous podcast, I told you, fermentation is one of the best ways to get your natural probiotics. So that's how European countries produce their wheat, their bread, right? They use a long fermentation process, and this partially breaks down gluten. So fermentation breaks down gluten, and it makes it more digestible. Okay. But here in the US, they don't do that because they want to mass produce bread, and they rush the production process. So they use a chemical dough conditioner. They use a chemical dough conditioner, which irritates sensitive guts. So it's not just gluten. Gluten is just it's kind of they get the bad rap, but it's really all of these other processing that the US does to produce wheat and bread that is killing Americans. Okay. So, but the bottom line is gluten isn't different. It's a protein. Gluten is not different. But the variety of the wheat, how the wheat is produced, how the breads, the gluten is processed, the preparation methods, these vary by the US and Europe. That is what affects. It's the process. I would say the processing of the wheat and gluten affects our health more than gluten itself. Because again, I've had friends that tell me, they are super gluten sensitive. If they eat gluten here in the US, they break out in hives and rashes and they get inflamed, autoimmune flares up. But they go to Italy and they start eating pizza, pasta, and they're okay. I'm pretty sure many of you have friends that do that. And this goes into another, thank you for the comments, everybody. I love comments. And I've had comments before that people say, hey, what if you're recommending to eat these types of foods and so forth. What if I can't get that in my country? I'm not in the US and I don't get access to that. And this is what I tell them. Hey, you have an advantage. Let's just say, talk about bread, wheat in general. You have an advantage. What you get is safer than what I get here in the US in regards to bread and the way, wheat is processed. You have an advantage over us. So it is, don't say that, hey, you can't get the food. You don't want the food from the US because of the way it's processed, okay? And until our government makes stricter rules and laws for the food manufacturings, the food in the US is going to continue to kill Americans. So, European standards in regards to how they regulate food is so much better, right? So, coming back to barley, remember, barley is used. Can you now understand how, when I was talking about barley actually can help? Barley contains gluten, but barley can actually improve your digestive system. It can decrease your gut permeability. But it depends on where they source the barley, right? So you need to make sure the barley is either sourced in Asia or it's sourced in Europe, but not sourced in the US, okay? So depending on how foods are processed, that will dictate, can you eat it or not, right? So again, but you're like, hey, I want to eat bread. Hey, you can make your own bread. I mean, I don't know how, okay? I'm not a bread eater, but I don't know how to do that. But I know I have many patients that make their own bread. Okay, get your own sourdough, and you can get the dough from Italy. You can get the specific wheat flour from Italy, right? So again, but make sure in the US, they're starting to make non-gluten flour. But you got to make sure, they have almond flour, but you got to make sure that how they're producing that almond flour. They may be producing it. Remember, it's not just the gluten, it's the process, the manufacturing process. Are they using any chemical additives? Are they using a chemical dough conditioner in the processing of that almond flour? You got to check those out, okay? So again, hopefully this was giving you more insight that gluten, it can be safe to eat. You can eat wheat safely. You just got to make sure you source it from the right country and the right companies. I have to look to see. I'm pretty sure there's companies here in the US that make it safe. I mean, they're not chemically making it. They're not synthetically making these wheat. They are sourcing it from Italy, or they're growing it in a confined. Here's the thing about, agriculture here in the US. They may be growing it organically, right? They may be growing your wheat organically with a specific strain, a variation that is from Europe. But where is that farm? Is that farm next to another farm that is growing the hybridized wheat? If so, if the wind blows, there's cross-contamination. So you see, unfortunately, you're like, man, this is getting too crazy. Yes, it is. But you don't think about the general public doesn't think about these things. Like the farms, are the farms, the organic farms that have the variety of wheat that is from Europe, are those farms near, it could be 20 miles near. When I say near, I'm not necessarily saying next door, like literally 10 feet. I'm talking about it could be 20 miles away. The wind blows up the wheat from those hybridized, genetically modified wheat variations, blows up those wheats, and it can just blow into the organic farms. And just think about it. If you don't believe me, in Texas, every year we have a season in Texas where we get the smoke from Mexico. How many miles away is that? If the wind can carry the fire smoke from Mexico all the way to Texas, why can't the wind carry the genetically modified wheat, gluten, from California to Texas? Why can't it do that? Same distance, it's less distance, right? So I don't know the solution to that about farming practices, but I'm just letting you know you have to pay attention to these things, right? The best way is to get wheat directly from Europe. I know it's more expensive, but if you want bread, okay, then that's the best way. Unless because you're thinking, oh man, that's too expensive. Well, let's look at the alternative. You continue to eat the wheat here, and it gives you gut permeability. It gives you an autoimmune condition. Now you have an autoimmune condition that you'll never be able to get rid of, and you have to take all these medications. You got to do all these supplements. How much does that add up? When you take that cost, you got the hospital bills, you got your doctor visits, you got your medication, your insurance now is going up because you have an autoimmune condition. Now you have to take supplements, that's going up. Now you have a less quality of life. You are limited to what food you can eat. That's one option right there. Those costs add up. If you start taking medication, you will never stop them. So that's like a recurring expense for the rest of your life. So that's one option. The other is if you want to eat wheat and bread, then buy it from Europe. And you won't develop the autoimmune condition, at least not from the bread. You may do it from something else, but not from the bread. You spend a little more money initially, and you get the better quality, and you don't develop the autoimmune, right? So you got to look at the pros and cons. You can't just say, hey man, it's so expensive. It's more expensive developing an autoimmune condition. I can tell you that. How do I know that? We treat patients with autoimmune. We help people reverse their autoimmune. It is more expensive developing an autoimmune. And your quality of life, your temporary satisfaction of eating the genetically modified wheat and bread here in the US, your temporary satisfaction for 1 or 2 years of good quality of life, and you ruin the rest of your life, right? Is it worth it? I'm not here to make the decision for you. This is what we do for our patients at our clinic. We give them all the options. We let them see the results, the consequences of their actions, and let them choose. And not everybody chooses to take care of their health. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but most people don't realize that when they take the shortcuts, they don't realize what's at the end of the line, right? And this could be 6 months to a year later. But again, that's just what we've seen. This is from our clinical research, you can say. This is what we have seen in our practice today. Okay, these are active clinical research. I'm not telling you based on something I read that did a research on rodents and rats. No, I'm talking about what happens every day in our practice, the patients that we talk to every day. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning on a different time zone. I'm in a time zone, but a different time. I'm still going to be in Taiwan next week. So on the 6th, this will be April the 7th, right? It'll be April the 7th. It'll be the same time. It's a Monday, April the 7th. It's 6 a.m. in Taiwan time. But it is, I believe, forgot what is the Central Standard Time. I believe it's 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, right? On a Sunday, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. But if you're in Taiwan time zone, we're on Monday, which is the 7th at 6 a.m. All right, guys, I will see you there. And that we'll do another podcast, and peace out.
This episode is sponsored by Achieve Integrative Health, the #1 acupuncture clinic in the US. We're grateful for their support in helping us bring you the Restorative Longevity Podcast.